Gen Z has been screwed out of owning a home here in Canada, and especially in Vancouver, right? And there's a million reasons for that. There's like government overspending, there's taxes and regulations and all these things that restrict new supply coming to market. There's a lot of malinvestment that pushed up prices, money laundering. There's like a billion things. You couldn't point to one simple thing and be like, that is the reason why I can't afford a house. There's like a million different reasons. That being said, I want to provide some perspective today. Being a young person myself, I'm actually not Gen Z. I'm like right on the cusp. I was born in 94. So I'm like right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, but I could, fit into either generation realistically. So I'm also a young person myself. So I want to provide some perspective. And I think the first part of that perspective is we as young people compare what life should be like to how the baby boomers got to live, right? And this isn't to take anything away from the baby boomer generation, but they got to grow up in like one of the probably the most economically fruitful time in human history, right? Like that 40-year time frame while they were growing up was like, not only was it probably the best it's ever been for humans, but they also grew up in like the best place you could have possibly been in the best time frame of human history would have been like Canada and the US between the 60s and the year 2000, right? Like obviously there was hardship, there was war, there was different things that were happening at that time. But in comparison to the rest of human history, that was pretty much as good as it's ever been right there in that window, right? So as young people, we like compare what life should be like to that, right? To like growing up in the 80s and how you could like work, you could be like a mailman and own a detached house in Vancouver, a current model F-150, have 2 kids and go on vacation. But outside of that one window, right? The rest of human history sucked substantially more than it does right now, right? So we are comparing like our idea of what life should be to the best it ever was. But if we were to actually go back in time and compare it to the rest of human history, where we were like dead broke for many thousands of years, right now it's still pretty good to be alive, even though you can't own a detached home in like one of the most expensive markets in the world. You can still afford to pay rent here and, eat good food and eat out at restaurants and, obviously have Netflix and a phone and internet and all these things, right? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't be pissed, but I'm providing a secondary perspective that hopefully, I guess, opens up your mind to, where we actually are right now, right? And here's the other thing that I hear is like, it's impossible to buy a home, right? And I still don't subscribe to that. Even though it's gotten way harder in the last 4 years, I still don't subscribe to that because I'm working with first-time home buyers every week. There's people doing it all the time, right? And if you want to do it, you have to fully commit yourself to the process of actually making it happen. If you're sitting there saying, this is impossible, I will never be able to do this, then of course you're not going to be able to do this. But if you're like, I am going to do this, and you actually commit to it, and you commit to dropping some of your expenses, you sacrifice, right? Maybe you don't live in Yale Town. Maybe you live 20 minutes down the road, 30 minutes down the road in Coquitlam to save on rent every month so you can put away more, capital for a down payment every single month. Maybe you pick up a job on the weekend or you work more hours or you do whatever you need to do to drop your expenses and increase your income to create that gap so you can set aside that money to have the down payment. Because you don't really need a big down payment. You just need 5%, right? Like 5% of a $400,000 condo is $20,000. And there are tons of $400,000 condos. It's just people don't want to sacrifice and actually move to the areas that have the $400,000 condos, right? So I have a first-time home buyer right now. They've lived in North Van their whole lives. They're moving to Langley with a 5% down payment, and they're buying a $400,000 condo. I myself, when I bought my first condo in 2017, I grew up, lived my whole life in Surrey, and I did exactly what, I'm preaching right now. I dropped my expenses as much as I could. and I increased my income. I was doing side jobs, on call shifts, night shifts, like just an insane amount of hours to actually, increase the gap between my income and the expenses. And I was putting away so much money that I was able to save that down payment in like 3 years. But it wasn't the down payment for the area that I actually really wanted to live in, which was Surrey. I wanted to obviously stay where I live, right? Instead, I bought like the cheapest 2-bedroom condo in Abbotsford, 35 minutes away from where I grew up. And it was a shitty unit, 1983 build, no in-suite laundry. Actually, while I was living there, somebody got jumped against my door, right? Because it was like the worst area in Abbotsford. And I come outside and there's like literally blood all over my door and all over the drywall and everything, right? So I'm like cleaning the blood off my door. It's how like shitty of an area this condo is located in. But I needed to get in the market, right? So I sacrificed on everything. I sacrificed on my expenses, my lifestyle. I sacrificed my time to work more hours. I sacrificed where I actually wanted to live. I moved 35 minutes away from like my friends and family, everybody, and I increased my commute. But I had a company vehicle, so I wasn't paying for the gas, right? And I know not everybody has that luxury, but if you're creative, there's usually a way you can make it work, right? Because what I find is like people it's not impossible. They could buy a home. They just don't want to live in the area where they can afford to buy the home. They want to keep saving until they have 700 grand to buy the 1-bedroom in Yaletown. There's not a lot of sacrifice. They would rather, like, here's the thing, right? You can either do that, what I just explained, or the inverse of that is maybe this huge reset happens and everything crashes and blah, blah. And then maybe you can get back into the market. But, you're still going to need to have a higher income than your expenses to buy the real estate after it crashes 40%, if and when. And the problem with that way of thinking is that now everything is completely taken out of your control, right? It's not, I'm going to do XYZ to make this happen. It's, I'm hoping XYZ happens so then I can do this. So here's the thing. Gen Z has been screwed. Historically speaking, comparatively speaking to the rest of human history, Gen Z really isn't that screwed. That's my opinion, right? This is also coming from somebody who's young and worked my ass off every single day. But you can go check my TikTok, my Instagram. I have posted content every single day for 4 years without missing. And before that, I was a plumber and I worked stupid hours. I worked like 60 plus hours a week, every single week for years. That's why I'm 30 years old and have massive bags under my eyes. But at the end of the day, I managed to get into the market by doing that. So Gen Z is screwed, but not as screwed as the rest of basically human history, right? But you can still overcome the disadvantages you're faced with and get into the market. It is not impossible to get into the market. It is just significantly harder than what it was even when I first got into the market 8 years ago. And if you're a first-time home buyer and you want to chat with me about getting into the market, you can use the link in my description to book a chat with me. Otherwise, I appreciate you for watching. I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.